The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and I want to highlight a weapon that probably doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. Sometimes it does, because we do see it in certain video games, and you obviously know what weapon it is by the virtue of the title of this video. Yes, the crowbar. Like, seriously, this is basically a metal stick, and then with some extra attachments, which just makes it even more deadly. Now, the other thing that really need to understand about the crowbar with how vicious it is the weight, because it's, I'm not like, it might be a little bit hollow on the inside. Do you think this is hollow, Oz? Like, I put it near your ear, like, hold it loosely. Does that sound hollow?
That's solid.
You reckon it's solid? That's near the mic.
Why would they make it hollow?
Oh, there's lots of ways. But even, if it's solid, it's a solid bit of metal. Being as solid as they are, you can really imagine that they can pack a bit of a punch. Let's kind of just see that. Ah! That was a bit of a... I missed it slightly. Oz.
Pick up that can.
Now, Oz, this probably will hurt you.
Yeah.
As to the history of the humble crowbar, there's not much that really needs to be said. It's a tool. The first instance of the word crowbar comes from like the 1400s even, and so I haven't seen any archaeological remains of it. And we can speculate that the name crowbar just comes from the fact that it has this kind of maybe crow beak, or maybe it looks like a crow's foot or something like that. But this isn't the only time people have used animal anatomy to describe weapons. In fact, crows are already being used, as we've seen in the bec de Corbin, or crow's beak, funnily enough. For its size, due to mainly its weight, it really does pack a wallop. There is a big downside to it, and that is that it's, I think it's perhaps even too heavy and too top heavy, which makes it quite cumbersome. So when you hit with it, the follow-up strikes are pretty, like, just that movement there, when I spun it down, that put a lot of stress on my wrist, because that weight just yanks down my wrist. And so even these strikes, like, oh, it's the second time I hit my sword, and that one really rung loud in my ear. Just got to be a bit more careful. Are you okay there, buddy? It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, you can get away with it. One of the ways you can mitigate that, of course, is holding it closer up. But then, you know, you have this getting in the way. And the other thing is, because it's much heavier than a regular weapon, because it's funny, it's kind of like a pro and con here. It hits so hard because it's so heavy, but it is so cumbersome and hard to really redirect and move, again, because it's so heavy. So you get a weapon that packs a massive punch, but then the weight, and just how cumbersome it is a big drawback, making it not nearly as efficient weapon as you might assume. Why is that? It's like, it's deadly, you can pack a punch. Shad, what do you mean it's not an effective weapon as a result? Here's an interesting thing about weapons. You only need them to be lethal enough. And this is a bit of a misconception. People think, like, say, a sword that is optimized for cutting and could cut people in half. Does that make it a great sword? Well, it can cut people, like, it can cut well, but if it's too heavy to use properly, because in combat, you need to do a lot more than just, you know, swing like a brute. You need to be able to defend yourself. You need to be able to regain after you hit. You need to be able to regain, to perhaps defend, block, and like being able to redirect. So if a strike is coming in quite quickly to your side, the faster you can move your weapon to block is very important. But with a crowbar, because it's so heavy, that means it takes more energy to move. Its inertia is greater. And so, like, look at this. If I wanted to block something and I try and push it, see what happened then? There's so much stationary inertia here that my hand does that. And this is coming after. It's like that. Contrast that to an arming sword. It is longer than the crowbar, but there's less mass. And it's a bit deceptive because, you know, it looks, if you just look casually, it's like, you know, you could assume the sword might have as much mass as the crowbar, but the crowbar is thick, whereas the sword is very, very thin. And so when I want to redirect and just block, like, I don't even need to move it like that. I can just bang, block, so easy, get more direction there. And so being able to redirect the sword is actually a lot easier because it's made to be an effective weapon. There's a big difference. Now, is a sword as lethal as a crowbar? Well, the sword, of course, is doing something that the crowbar is not. It is concentrating the force onto a very fine edge. So even though it can't hit with as much force as a crowbar, it can potentially do more damage. Not as much concussive damage, obviously. The crowbar massively excels with just blunt force, but a sword is not a blunt force weapon. And so this is a good contrast to see an actual optimized weapon versus one that is not. This is a tool. It's made to be a tool first and not a weapon. If you were to make a weapon that has similar properties to a crowbar, well, you'd see something like a mace, where the weight is concentrated where it needs to be, and it is heavy as it needs to be lethal enough. So the crowbar has some very distinct drawbacks. Now, it's not to say you wouldn't get unique benefits out of its way. Like I said, it could really pack a punch, but that means this would be a uniquely effective and deadly weapon against armor because it's so heavy. The drawbacks that it has would really depend on what the opponent is using. If they're using a weapon that they can't really take as much advantage against you because you've got something so big and just heavy like this, yeah, you might be able to get away with it. And we should not look away from the fact that it has this hook on top. Like if you, instead of striking someone with the blunt end, striking someone with this end with all the weight and power behind it, oh, that's vicious stuff. And I think that could really do some damage, even against armor, especially if you hit him in the head. This applies even more so when you consider hitting someone without armor, and it's just flesh. And, you know, if you're the stereotypical iconic place that the crowbar is used in games is in Half-Life. You know what threw me out of Half-Life when you use a crowbar? See how darn quick you hit with them. It's like ting, 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 ting. Try and do that with a flipping real crowbar. All right, let's see how quickly I could hit Boromir in comparison to how they do it in Half-Life. Now, I'm not actually going to be hitting with this because this could get caught and prevent a follow-up. So if I just wanted to see how quick, whoa, that follow-up. This puts so much strain on your arm. And if I wanted to try and do basic hits and like this, this is a killer on your hand and wrist. Now, that wasn't me going 100%, because honestly, I don't want to try 100% because the faster I try to go with this, the more strain on my wrist, and I reckon this could legitimately cause injury. There's an obvious way to try and fix this. Instead of doing one-handed, use it two-handed, all right? And then you could put more, you know, momentum into it, and the recovery, so when you want to hit and hit and hit, is a lot easier. Now, I got to be careful because I want to be careful on that back swing and I don't want to hit the sword again. But if I hit here, hit here, hit here, Now, what's interesting, I knocked him over, he was getting more and more wobbly, granted, but I suspect it will not take too much of a swing, like a build-up, to knock Boromir off his balance because there's just so much mass behind it. Like when you hit, because of inertia being, you know, having more mass, it takes far more to decelerate this when in motion. And so even a small hit, look at that, he almost fell over just then. Like, that's the interesting thing about momentum. It's a combination of mass and velocity. And because this is so much more mass, I don't need to hit nearly as fast, which means I don't need to build up heaps of speed. I can just hit from here, and the impact can have as much or more energy than a big wind-up swing with something with less mass, like we're seeing with my good old wacky stick. So again, I'm going to do a really small one, and let's see how much it takes to knock Boromir over. So maybe out here, just that was pretty close. So half-hearted, you know, wider swing with a bit more of a build-up, just so yeah, a lot of, but man, the big thing I think you need to account for and keep in mind with a crowbar is the strain on your wrist. This is too heavy to be an effective weapon, but, well, this is what I mean. Of course, you can use it to a level of effect. When I say an effective weapon, I mean like a weapon that's optimized to get the right balance of usability, you know, where you can redirect his motion really quickly, but also lethal, like perfectly lethal enough. And a weapon, like a really good weapon, is one that can do high lethality without too much strain in its usability, where it's not awkward and stuff. And that's what makes the crowbar a poor weapon, even though out of improvised weapons that you can grab at a pinch, this is such a deadly one. And I kind of like its place in Half-Life as a result of that. Because if you just needed to grab something that could be lethal, this thing is definitely it. There is another detriment to the crowbar, and that is for the weight, considering how difficult it is to redirect and move, its reach is utterly pathetic, okay? And reach is important because if you have to fight people in melee range, the further you can keep them away from you and strike them is a big advantage. And consider how hard this is to redirect for something this small compared to my big two-hander right here, okay? So this, I mean, look at how much longer this is, the reach you get on this, and it is so much easier to redirect the momentum on this. Like, I love swords. Swords are great. Like, especially when I was just struggling with the momentum of that last, the crowbar, getting something like this that has so much reach and length and is so lethal, and you can redirect it so much easier. This is where you really see the difference, where this is a real weapon compared to an improvised one. That's not to say there aren't other ways you could hold this to make it easier on yourself, like this. Like if you're just, this is your kind of basic defensive stance, and when you strike, you kind of move your hand grip like an axe, swinging it up like that, and then recovery. This is much easier. This is much more comfortable to use. It means defending is much harder, but just the rest stance like this, and then when you want to hit and you go big, and then you can bring it back, and much, much better. Now, there are other uses you could get out of because of the hook. Hooking, yeah, maybe like riot shield or something like that, pulling down for a big whack on the follow-up. So there's additional uses out of it. And out of the imperfect weapon category, I would say this is pretty decent still, pretty decent. I wouldn't call it garbage, like nunchucks, because they're garbage. I'm just doing it to troll people now, okay? They get so butthurt about it. Honestly, I still don't like nunchucks, but they can hit hard, and you'd be able to. But I even said this in my other videos. Even trying to say the certain benefits you can get out of it, doesn't do it enough for people. So it's like, fine, they're garbage. Use a stick for a crowbar. Can you wear a crowbar? Of course you can wear a crowbar. Hang on. Let me get it in. Get in. Sure. Look at this. Crowbar. Like just, all you need is a belt. Could you conceal? Again, I think my argument that a weapon that doesn't need to be concealed is a better weapon than one that does. And this is the interesting thing. Crowbars aren't illegal. You got to keep them in your car. It's just a tool in case you need it. What if it's something that you need to work your jack in your car? So there's ways to keep it as a self-defense item if you really need it or you really want to. But honestly, I think a better balanced stick that can still do enough damage, more than enough, is probably better than a crowbar, honestly. So that's my hot take. Still good. It's not a perfect weapon, but it's out of the imperfect ones, it's one of the good ones. If that makes sense. So there we go. These are my thoughts on the crowbar. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments below. Look forward to reading them, and of course I look forward to seeing you in the next episode here on Shutterversity. So until that time, farewell.